Well, I'm doing extremely well. I was, like yourself, working in all hours. One wishes it was a 48 hours. Well, it has 48 hours in the day, but we only have 24. And I suspect with all that's going on, if it was a 48-hour day, well, that would just fill up with more news, to be honest. But I'm well. I've had a good restful time, and my dog is barking, and I think he wants me to let out. So over to you, over to you, Alex and Gonzalo.
Gonzalo, how
Yeah,
are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. And thank you as always for having me on. It's always such a pleasure. And hello, chat. I hope that you guys are doing well because we've got a couple of hours of very interesting developments that are going on in Ukraine. All kinds of stuff is going on. And yesterday there was Putin gave out a warning of, quote, lightning strikes against any outside forces that interfere in the special military operation. You guys hear about that one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he said it, by the way. Yeah.
Let's get into it real quick. Let's just say hello to everybody real quick, and then let's talk about what's going on the ground, what Putin said, Alexander, Gonzalo, and let's talk about, of course, gas for rubles, which I think is one of the big stories that we need to discuss. But first, let's say hello to everyone joining us on Odyssey, on Rumble, on YouTube, and on our great locals community. And thank you to our moderators. Let's just give a quick shout out to our moderators. I saw Lady Cosmica is with us, and Alan Watson is with us. And who else? I think those are our moderators right now, and I'm sure more moderators will join soon. So anyway, let's get rolling, guys. Super chats. We'll try to answer the super chats as the show goes on. We're going to do a hard stop at 2 hours because I have to go somewhere in 2 hours. But if we have time, we'll answer super chats. Whatever super chats or questions from locals or Rumble or Odyssey that we can't answer, we are going to do a dedicated show. We're going to answer all of those questions. No doubt about it. 100%. We're going to get to all those questions. All right. Gonzalo brought up lightning. What did he say? Lightning fast or lightning speed?
Lightning strikes.
Or grease lightning?
Because this is my sense, and you guys tell me what you think. My sense is that the West is realizing that the war is coming to a rapid conclusion, that what's been going on insofar as the battle of the East and the Donbass is going extremely badly for the Western interests. And they've been making all kinds of noises about interference, nuclear strikes, all kinds of crazy talk. Normalizing nuclear war. That's the thing that I find deeply, deeply upsetting on a personal level. But Putin yesterday, gave out a speech that was not so much a speech; it was a talk. I forget where it was, but I the point that he referred that any outside force that is going to suffer lightning strikes. That seemed very scary, to tell you the truth. I mean, like basically saying, look, we're only dialing up this special military operation up to 5 or 6, but if you interfere, we're going to dial it all the way up to 11, and you're not going to like it. That seemed to be the message. I mean, it was, for all intents and purposes, an outright threat to NATO to not interfere. That's how I read it. How did you gentlemen read it?
I read it in exactly the same way. Now, can I just say, the venue was actually a historic one. It was the building, the Tavrichevsky Palace in St. Petersburg, which used to house the Imperial State Duma. And, this is the Tsar's Duma. And Putin was actually speaking from the lectern in the actual assembly hall of the Imperial State Duma, the Russian parliament before the revolution. It's a historical observation. But of course, Tavrichevsky Palace refers to Taurida, which was the name that the Tsarist government gave to the region of Russia that included Crimea and Kherson region. So, you can draw whatever conclusions you want from that. It might just have been coincidence, or it might have been something bigger.
No.
But I actually think that there was a particular reason why Putin gave this warning. Now, in fairness, the Russians did give a similar warning right at the start of the operation, they said that if there was any Western involvement, direct Western involvement or NATO involvement in the war, that Russia would take immediate and overwhelming action against it. But in the last few hours, I've seen reports which I cannot confirm. They're coming from third sources, and they might not be completely reliable. But there are reports that the SVR, which is Russia's intelligence agency, has said that there was a discussion in NATO in March, whereby if things in Ukraine turned really bad, the Polish military would intervene in Western Ukraine, and that this decision, that this action has now been moved forward, because, as we're going to discuss in a moment, the situation in Ukraine is now turning, from NATO's point of view, extremely bad. So I think that it could be, on the assumption that this SVR report exists. The SVR is Russia's foreign intelligence agency, but on the assumption that it does exist, it could be a warning from Putin to the Poles: stay out of this war. Don't put boots on the ground. If you put boots on the ground, we will take action against you. And he didn't specify what that action would be, but the reference to lightning strikes, to my mind, points clearly to hypersonic weapons.
Yeah, I heard the same report that you did from this gentleman, Narishkin, who basically said that the Poles were planning on invading on their own, not as a part of NATO, but on their own.
That's right.
Western Ukraine. And it talked about historically Polish areas, which I would assume would include the city of Lviv. Which is now a nucleus of Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion. Are the Poles going to invade, and all of a sudden the resistors in Lviv are going to have two enemies? The Russians and the Poles. I don't know, but this is what I can surmise. The fact that this intelligence, this chief of intelligence, would say something like this signals two things. Number one, they have the receipts, they have recordings, they have intercepted communications that are ironclad, because no head of any intelligence organization would ever say something so provocative unless he was absolutely sure. Number one. And number two, this was a political decision to reveal this information, and it was taken at the highest level, because this is so provocative that you would never just allow even the head of a very important branch of your security service to go solo and say something like this. This must have been approved and discussed in great detail before he gave this announcement. And that leads me to conclude two things. Number one, it's absolutely true. And number two, it's a warning. Don't do it, because we're going to respond, and we're going to respond militarily. In the favorite phrase of art now, it's going to be a kinetic response, as they like to use euphemistically now. I think you see, when you're coming to the end of a process, a lot of times it's when there's the greatest danger, because of the unpredictability of the situation.
Yes,
and it seems. There are a lot of different signs from a lot of different directions that what's happening in eastern Ukraine is catastrophic. It's not just that we're seeing a lot of videos coming out in Telegram showing mass surrenders and Russian groups overrunning different villages and whatnot, and the reporting of villages being overrun. It's for instance, there's this journalist on Twitter, a man named Julian Rupke, whom I had not heard of, but from a casual glance, he seems to be a very plugged-in journalist with the magazine Bild in Germany. And he said outright that, quote, Russia is crushing Ukrainian defenses. They're basically preparing the narrative, preparing the ground for a catastrophe. So this journalist, Rupke, is he must have gotten information from his German government sources, and so I think that a catastrophe is about to be declared, and what happens as a response to this catastrophe is going to be completely unpredictable and determinant as to the outcome of this entire conflict. That's my assessment at this time. What do you gentlemen think?
No, I agree. I'm getting the same information, by the way. I mean, we've been discussing this, all three of us, in various formats for some time, that the Russians are grinding the Ukrainian military in Donbass down, and we've had a really very strange series of contradictory comments coming out of the British government, but perhaps the most alarmist, if you like, and one which suggests to me that the British are also starting to twig that this is the situation, came from Ben Wallace, the British Defence Secretary, who, as I said, is not, in my opinion, the sharpest knife in the drawer, not by any stretch of
any
the
of them.
imagination. But anyway, he did say that Putin, he always personalised it around Putin, is looking to embed himself in Ukraine like a cancer. Really, insulting language. But you see, if you think about it, I mean, the point about cancers is that they have this tendency to grow. And the very fact that he's talking in that way, that Ben Wallace is talking in that kind of a way, and, Putin seeking to do this, it does suggest that the British are getting very alarming information from the front lines in Ukraine. Now, can I just say, if the British are getting this information, it would be unsurprising, because if you actually follow the ebb and flow of the battle in the way that all three of us do, then you would know that this is, in fact, absolutely obvious. I mean, you're seeing the Russians and their allies, they're gnawing, as somebody put it, they're cracking Ukrainian defenses in all sorts of places. You see the Ukrainians launching increasingly desperate counterattacks. And I've seen pictures, I'm sure all of you have, of some of the Ukrainian soldiers that get captured. And, they look like, to be straightforward about it, older, less trained men. And
Yes.
many of them apparently come from the territorial reserve forces. So it suggests that Ukraine is running out of trained manpower, as well as weapon systems and all those things. And as somebody pointed out to me long ago, not about this particular war, about the first US-Iraq war in 1991, building fortifications, building bunkers and trenches and all these kind of things, obviously it can make your position more defendable, but it can also you are also in danger of creating for yourself a trap, because you get pinned down within your own fortifications. It means the enemy knows exactly where you are. They can direct overwhelming firepower at you. And when your defenses, your bunkers and your trenches start to become overwhelmed, then of course you've got nowhere to hide and you've got nowhere to escape to. And I think that's probably consistent with what we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment, in eastern Ukraine, in Donbass at the moment. The Russians and their allies are taking more and more villages, more and more settlements. They're creeping ever closer to Slavyansk in the north. They're moving north, apparently, to cut off the remaining Ukrainian forces opposite Donetsk from their remaining supply lines, which are already very tenuous. They're acting to cut off the railway system. They're doing all of these sort of things. So this is the overall picture. And of course, as you absolutely rightly say, given that Western governments have invested so much in Ukraine, if that turns out like that, then of course, and if you make it so difficult for yourself to compromise and to negotiate peace, then the very great danger is that people will escalate and do reckless things, like sending the Polish troops into Western Ukraine, something that's been talked about for weeks. And of course, if the Polish troops do enter Western Ukraine, we now have this warning from Putin, and I'm sure it was directed at them, that they're going to be the target of hypersonic missile strikes. And the US at that point will have to make a very difficult decision. Does it rescue these troops or does it abandon them? And if it abandons them, that's going to be very, very, very difficult to explain in Poland. So that's where we are. That's, I think, the military picture. And of course, Poland has also gone out very far on a limb. And this is where we come to some of the topics we were going to discuss in this program, by rejecting gas for rubles, even though we now hear reports that all sorts of other European companies are Uniper in Germany, Eni in Italy, all sorts of other European companies are now complying with Putin's decree. Though in the last few minutes, we've heard that a European official, an EU official, is trying to hold the line and is now issuing warnings, which apparently are being rejected in Germany, that complying with Putin's decree violates sanctions. Not sure how it does, by the way, but that's what this official is apparently trying to say. He's probably East European, by the way. I don't know who he is. But regardless, so we see that the Poles are trying to push Europe into taking very hard line, both in military terms and in economic terms. And they're at risk in both cases, it seems, to me, of finding themselves out on a limb.
I completely agree with you. My thinking about this, euros for rubles scheme or program that is being implemented by Gazprom is I tweeted about this, a long thread about this particular issue. And, a plug to everybody for now. My only social media is my Twitter account, and it's Gonzalo Lira 1968. Gonzalo
I'll
Lira.
put that in the chat. I'll put that in the chat right now, Gonzalo.
Thanks.
Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Alex. But the point is that, see, something that I noticed from the very get-go, from the moment I heard this euros for rubles program, you see, the Europeans in their sanction mania basically put a guillotine between European economies and Russian economies. As a practical matter, it is now illegal to trade euros for rubles in the European zone. And so the only way to get rubles is by going to Gazprom, because the system, for those of you who don't know, the system is very simple. If I am a European company that needs to buy gas for whatever reason, I go to Gazprom Bank. I make a deposit in euros. Gazprom Bank opens a parallel account in my name in rubles. They are the ones who exchange my euros for rubles. And I take those rubles and I pay Gazprom for the gas that I need. That's the system. Now, the thing is, see, I cannot show up with rubles and pay. Gazprom Bank has said specifically that nobody can do this because they want to close some loopholes that is not important for this conversation. But the point is, see, you can only go with euros, deposit them, and get rubles. But who values those euros? Gazprom. Gazprom can set whatever price it wants for those euros that I deposit with them. If they want to be generous, they can give me 85 rubles per euro. If they want to be nasty, they can say 65. And how am I to challenge that? How am I to get any kind of redress? I can't. In fact, there is no way for me to get rubles to buy the gas that I need for my company. And see, because of this scheme or the system or program, whatever you want to call it, Gazprom Bank can give preferential treatment to any company that it wants to from any nationality. Say I'm a Serbian company. Now, Serbia uses the dinar, but of course, for their foreign currency exchanges, they use the euro. Now, they will have euros. They will go to Gazprom Bank. They will deposit them. And because I'm a Serbian company and Serbia is extremely friendly to Russia, it's not one of the unfriendly nations list. On the contrary, Gazprom can say, "Oh, Mr. Serbia, here you go. Here are 85 rubles per euro." But if I'm a German company, Gazprom can easily say, "Well, you're only going to get 70 rubles per euro." And that price differential, which in this hypothetical case is 20%, would render one company extremely prosperous, profitable, competitive, because it would have cheap energy, because these rubles can only be used to buy gas, see? And so what Gazprom Bank is doing by this scheme is essentially it will be able to fine-tune and literally crush any country's economy if they don't play their game. And worst of all, you see, the Russians are expanding this system to encompass not just natural gas, but also oil. Rosneft, which is the big oil company in Russia, is planning on rolling out a program very similar to Gazprom's, and they'll probably be linked up somehow eventually.
And the same can be said insofar as agricultural commodities, industrial commodities, metals, different gases, different industrial products. So all of a sudden, the Kremlin will have enormous power over the Eurozone. And as a practical matter, the Russians, if they start to fiddle with the exchange rate for different companies from different countries get different exchange rates, they will have essentially broken the Eurozone because the euro will no longer be fungible. It will have different valuations in different places geographically. And the consequences of this will be catastrophic for Europe. I mean, people haven't really thought this through. This is a
No.
big deal. Sorry for the long-winded explanation, but it's a complex topic, but it is very important to understand it, that the consequences will be catastrophic for Europe.
You're absolutely correct. You've put it precisely right. Can I say, Gonzalo, it didn't occur to me, and then somebody wrote to me an email pointing essentially the very scenario that you've outlined, not as fully or in such a detailed way, but you're absolutely correct. The Europeans never thought anything out because they didn't expect they would need to. They thought back in February when they announced those sanctions against the Russian central bank, that the Russian banking system, that the entire financial system in Russia would collapse like a house of cards. And if you remember, you go back to what happened in February when the announcement was made. I can remember a US anonymous official, White House anonymous official, talking about how the ruble would crash, it would go into free fall because the central bank wouldn't be able to support the ruble. And it assumed that that would result in a cascade of defaults across the Russian financial system. And of course, that was the operative assumption behind the entire February sanctions package. So they didn't think they needed to think it through. But of course, things have turned out otherwise. The ruble is continuing to strengthen even as I've been speaking. I've just checked, and it's strengthened further over the course of the day. The Russian financial system remains solid because, of course, they are working from an old playbook. They assumed in the West that the financial system in Russia was the same as it was back in 2008 and in 1998 when it obtained most of its funding or lots of its funding externally. So at that point, the assumption was because the financial system is so plugged into the world financial system, which is effectively the American financial system and the European financial system, that if Russia went into default, it would all collapse because Russian banks wouldn't be able to raise funding and they'd all collapse in consequence. And of course, the assumption was that the Russians wouldn't want that to happen. So they would be draining their foreign currency earnings by trying to support the ruble and pay debts. And of course, none of that has happened because today, as a result of a whole succession of measures that the Russians have been taking ever since 2008, the Russian banking system, the Russian financial system is self-supporting. It has, in effect, no longer depends on external funding in order to operate. It is actually a genuine Russian financial system. So the Western governments have found themselves in a situation completely different from the one that they anticipated, and one which they have no real answer to. And if you follow the media here in Britain, and of course I'm in the eye of the storm because remember, Britain is a big financial center, is one of the big financial centers. You're starting to get a sense of a whiff of panic and confusion as this is working out. I think they didn't quite expect that the Russians would act on their threats to cut off gas to countries like Poland and Finland, probably, and Bulgaria too. And so, they didn't expect this. They didn't quite imagine that this would happen. At the same time, they're starting to figure out that if they comply with this procedure, it will have exactly the effect that you said, Gonzalo. So they don't want to agree to it. On the other hand, their companies, Uniper in Germany, Eni in Italy, the big one in Austria, are all saying, look, we can't do otherwise. If you want us to fulfill our obligations, we have to buy gas. And that means we have to comply with this arrangement. So they're caught. And we're getting contradictory statements from governments. We see the Habeck, the German economics minister, saying, this is fine. This procedure is sanctions compliant. We saw the European Commission say a few days ago that it was sanctions compliant. We've now had an anonymous official this morning trying to say that it's not. Decisions ultimately about this, sanctions enforcement, depends on what governments do. Anyway, they are in chaos. They don't know what to do. They have realized that alternative sources of gas are simply not there. Algeria said today that it warned Spain that if Spain resells or re-exports Algerian gas to other third parties in Europe to try to fill gaps, Algeria will cut back on sales.
Jeez.
That's what they said. Qatar has given warnings it can't fill the gap. LNG from the US can only do so much, and it's nowhere near enough. So they are in a very difficult position, and they don't really seem to know quite what to do in this situation. Now, my own guess is ultimately they have no option if they're going to keep factories running and homes warm and avoid rationing, which the German industrial groups have said would be a catastrophe, that they will have to comply with this gas for rubles thing. But of course, they don't like it, and they're screaming about it. And one gets the sense of people running around in a sense of panic as they're trying to come up with some kind of plan. And they've got the same problem with oil, because, of course, there was going to be all kinds of brave and heroic decisions to stop oil imports from Russia. Except, of course, again, they haven't really thought that out, because oil from the Gulf, obviously it's there, but it has to be sent by ship. There's lots of demands for oil from the Gulf, amongst other countries. If you cut yourself off from Russian oil, that will simply increase prices. And bear in mind, even if prices in Europe, even if the Russians are able to sell their oil elsewhere, it will still mean that oil prices in Europe are higher than they would otherwise be, or than they would be in other places. Because, if you're Indonesia or the Philippines or South Korea, you can buy Russian oil at any price, or oil from anywhere at any price. But if you're in Europe and you've imposed a ban on oil imports from Russia, then of course you've cut yourself off from a large part of the Russian oil, the world oil supply. And that inevitably increases prices. It increases prices globally, but it increases prices most in Europe. And so they're in difficulties over that. And they're probably being told by their refiners that, we need Russian oil because Russian oil is heavy, and we need heavy oil for our diesel. And we are already looking at diesel shortages. So they've got themselves into a terrible mess because they didn't think this through. And this is, by the way, the first time over the last 30, 40 years since the West started to impose sanctions on countries, when they've discovered, to their horror, that imposing sanctions is not cost-free. It's starting to affect European businesses, American companies, American and European consumers of food, of energy, of metals. And of course, beyond that, they've put themselves, as Gonzalo absolutely brilliantly set out, in a position where the Russians can dictate terms to the Eurozone. So, they haven't thought this through. They didn't listen to the experts. I can remember, I did lots of reading and lots of programs in the run up to the war. The energy experts warned them that oil and gas prices our supplies are very tight. There aren't alternatives to be found. They disregarded that. They didn't seek the advice of the experts in the financial world about, the sanctions on the Russian central bank. And now they find themselves in an extremely difficult situation, and they don't seem to have any clear answers.
Well, like I told you, oh, I'm sorry, Alex, please.
No. I just want to say one real quick thing, Gonzalo, and I'd like your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
if we take a step back, we also realize that Russia really has not done anything in
No.
retaliation
No.
to the shock and awe of the collective West sanctions. That's the truth, isn't it, Gonzalo? I mean, Russia has only done one thing. That is, they've said,
The
gas
euros
for rubles. Yeah, euros to accounts.
Yeah.
Give us euro. They're not even saying give us rubles. Give us euros. We'll exchange them. We'll deposit euros into your account. You can buy the gas. Russia has not retaliated at all. And look at what's happening to the collective West.
Yes.
Well, my thinking is that this shows the arrogance of Europe, because they only looked at Russia in terms of GDP. And I think that they were thinking, well, it's kind of big. It's bigger than Iran or Venezuela. Then we impose sanctions on them, and that really hurt them. But Russia's a little bit bigger, but it's only the size of Italy nominally.
Yeah.
We can get away with it. And that, I think that was it seems so simplistic, but I think that that's basically what they were thinking. And I think too that they went along with the superficial analysis that GDP is all that matters on the one hand, and on the other, they failed to understand how truly vulnerable they were to Russia's countermeasures. Because, Alex, you're absolutely right. The Russians have not really carried out any countermeasures. And for all the nonsense talk coming out of Europe that Putin can blackmail Europe and blah, 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 they haven't. The Russians have not done any really deliberate damaging move to Europe yet. But that door is always open. And the Russians are much more intelligent than the Europeans. And by the way, notice that I say the Russians, because people keep saying Putin. But Putin is he is, of course, the president of Russia, but he does not act alone. The people around him, the entire elite layer of Russian society, they find expression in what he is doing. And do keep in mind, to a lot of those elites, they consider Putin a moderate, and sometimes they are upset with him because they think that he doesn't go far enough and protect Russia's interests the way it should be protected. And so it goes to show you that the gamut of opinion is wider than people in the West realize, but they also fail to understand that it's not just Putin who's ordering everybody around. No, he is merely the surfer riding the wave of Russian elite opinion. And Russian elite opinion is, to be perfectly vulgar and blunt about it, they are pissed at Europe and they want to punish Europe. And that punishment will come eventually. And I have no idea what exactly the form will be. I suspect it will be cutting them off from energy and food. I think that is in the cards. And I think that they will carry out that punishment. And because I think that I've been monitoring the Russian situation. Russians are unbelievably angry at the European sanctions, and they want to punish Europe. They will get their pound of flesh, and it is going to hurt Europe like nothing since the Great Depression. That's my opinion at this time.
Yes, I agree with this. I just want to make one important qualification. Russia has done one very important thing, which should not be underestimated. It survived. I mean, the reason we are in this situation is because the Russians were able to withstand the shock and awe blitzkrieg that we saw in February. Now, that is a big thing. Now, that is a reactive step by the Russians as opposed to a proactive one. But I mean, they did do that. And I think it's an important thing to understand. Now, I completely agree. I think that from this moment on, especially as situation in the Russian economy stabilizes, which it will do over the course of the next few months, we will start to see the pain dial rise. I mean, they said gas for rubles. There'll be oil for rubles. There'll be food for rubles. There'll be fertilizer for rubles. There'll be all kinds of other things, the like of which I simply don't know. There'll be blocks on supplies of neon gas to Taiwan, creating, shortages for, the semiconductor industries. There'll be all kinds of things. It'll be gradually edging upwards. And I'm not going to try and anticipate or guess what the Russians are going to do, because I think that's impossible. But I do want to fully endorse and agree with the point that Gonzalo has made. This constant personalization of everything in Russia around Putin, on Putin, is completely wrong. And it is one of the reasons why Western governments constantly make mistakes, because they think that they're dealing with one person and they don't understand that though this person is important, what he acts as is, as the CEO or the chair of the board, if you like. There are thousands of people involved in making decisions. These are highly educated, very trained people, at least as sophisticated in technocratic terms as anyone you would find in any Western government. And they are, fully
And
able
politically
to,
far more sophisticated.
and politically far more sophisticated and strategically minded. So, of course, you're not dealing with one person. You're dealing with you're dealing with a whole country, and a country which, as has been said, is the commodity superpower with enormous depths of resources and with very, very strong friendships and alliances and connections with the rest of the world. So, I think that this idea that if it's this bad man in the Kremlin, Putin, the new dictator. I mean, it is based on it's not just simplistic; it is incredibly dangerously wrong. By the way, I've now seen confirmation. I mean, obviously you had it, Gonzalo, but I've seen a Russian confirmation about that SVR report. The Russian media are now the Russian official media are now confirming that the SVR did give that report about the Polish deployments into Western Ukraine. So I'm now absolutely sure that that was what Putin's warning to yesterday was about.
Oh, and also, but like I said, it's real. It's not that the Russians are making it up, because it's something like that. I mean, like low-level propaganda. Oh, they're eating babies or that kind of nonsense propaganda. Sure, from some random Twitter account. Yeah. But the head of a intelligence service, no, he's not going to say something that provocative. And I insist, this came from the top. Lavrov and Putin and Shoigu talked about this specific issue and how to deal with it. But anyway, going back to something else, I want to pivot the conversation slightly. Did you know in Canada they're going to essentially steal all the assets of Russian citizens in Canada?
Not just in Canada, they're doing the same in the US.
Also, in the US, they're floating a bill for it as well. They're pushing Biden to try and do the same.
I find it outrageous. I mean, this is collective punishment. This goes against every principle of the Western democracies. I cannot believe it. And the thing is also, in the Globe and Mail article that I read about this particular issue, they said that it was 1,100 Russian citizens, and the assets in question were worth the tens of millions of Canadian dollars, I assume. Okay, so we're talking about trivial amounts of money per individual. Because if it's 1,100 individuals, and say for the sake of argument, it's $100 million. Okay, you're talking about on average less than $100,000 on average. These are middle class people. What the hell are they doing? I mean, it's insane as far as I'm concerned to be stealing people's money and their assets merely because they come from a specific country. I insist this goes against everything that we in the West believe in. This goes against a bedrock principle of collective punishment. I cannot believe it. I'm shocked. I can't believe. I'm glad that I can still be shocked, but I can't believe that this is happening.
Well, can I say, Gonzalo, I share your incredulity. I mean, if anybody had told me 5 years ago, say, that we would be in this situation and we would see things like that, happen, I would have said impossible, inconceivable. And by the way, there's a legal opinion about this. By I have either of you. I'm sure Alex knows him, but Gonzalo, do you know Judge Napolitano? He's somebody who writes. Anyway, he's written a whole piece somewhere, which has actually said exactly the point that you've made, that this violates every principle of due process, every principle of private property protection. He believes, and I'm absolutely sure he's right, that this measure is unconstitutional, at least if it's imposed in the United States, and all the indications are that it will be. But it is entirely consistent with the way the Biden administration conducts policy. We've seen that it has shown no concern for fundamental legalities or constitutional principles on all sorts of issues. And of course, if Biden does that, Trudeau and Freeland in Canada are not going to be left behind. So this is what's happening. What is really
the other issue I wanted to raise is that they're talking now of taking the sovereign foreign reserves of Russia that they stole, the 300 billion, which, as I understand it, is the greatest single theft in world history. They're going to give it to the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians, we know what they're going to do with it. They're going to steal it.
I mean, I'm not give it back to the guys that gave it to them.
That's 10% for the big guy.
I know. Well, I mean, all that money is going to, exactly. It's all going to be recycled back. I mean, it'd be used supposedly to buy weapons, to buy all kinds of things. I mean, it's just, it's a ludicrous. It's an outrageous thing.
Alexander, they did the same thing to Cyprus in 2013. They did it to Greece for 10 years. I mean, Cyprus, they went into the banks and they stole people's money. So, I mean, this is not a first. I mean, for me, I'm watching all this and I'm saying this is not a first. I've seen it.
It's not a first.
These guys are thieves. They're freaking thieves. And they're doing this. And real quick, one final thought. They're doing this. They're resorting to this type of thievery in Canada and in the U.S., possibly in the U.S. and in Canada, because they are losing. And right before this entire Ukraine project crashes, they're saying, you know what? Let's run into the store and grab everything we freaking can before this thing falls apart.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right on every point.
People, what level? How low? I mean, just the parentheses and observe these people of such people of low moral character. I mean, zero morality of any sort. I'm sorry.
Well, and can I just say the other thing that, and I've discussed this before, in other places, but the other thing that is becoming, for me, even more shocking than that they're seizing property and assets, is that they're taking every possible step they can now to deny Russians legal representation.
Yeah.
So just to give an example, I mean, when I last discussed this on another live stream, this was just a rumor. I mean, a rumor that I've got reasons to believe was true. But now there are threats in the US to impose sanctions on British lawyers who've acted for oligarchs, people that are called oligarchs. So even if that doesn't happen, any British lawyer now knows that if they act for a Russian business person, and bear in mind, any Russian business person can be called an oligarch. I mean, an oligarch is a meaningless label. Then they are at risk of being sanctioned by the United States. So which of them will do it? Will do it? None of them will. And the same will happen everywhere.
In Germany, I mean, Germany, but this is the rumor I'm hearing vaguely, that there are German politicians who are saying, and German press people and whatnot, who are saying that anybody who ever had like pro-Russian sentiments or tried to deal with the Russians should be expunged from the government and from public life. I mean, we're talking about persecuting people for negotiating with Russians because it was in the interest of Germany at the time to negotiate with the Russians.
I know.
It's a hysteria. It's just shocking.
Well, it is, and as you absolutely. By the way, there are those people saying those things in Germany, but as I said, the whole thing is becoming. I mean, it's sinister in ways that I could never have imagined. And can I just repeat the point which I've made many times? Serial killers, abusers of women, children, whatever. They get legal representation. They have a right to it, and so they should. By the way, if they're brought before a court. Everybody has a right to legal representation.
Jeffrey Dahmer, 8 people, and he got legal redress.
Absolutely. But, but Russian business people trying to recover their property or defend their reputations in court proceedings, they should not be allowed legal representation. And now that is again so illegal, so wrong at so many levels. I mean, I'm incredulous that people.
But January 6th, Alexander, January 6th.
January 6th,
Those
yeah.
Oh,
people
yeah, I
got
mean, you
no
know,
legal
these are all
representation. The
these are
people
the,
involved, yeah, that's my point. The people in the Freedom Convoy, they got their assets
no,
stolen as
no,
well. I mean,
no.
this has been
Well,
like an evolution.
okay,
So
yeah.
so yesterday it was January 6th, and it was the Freedom Convoy. Today it's the Russians. Tomorrow it's
Oh, I
going to
know.
be something else.
Oh, I
And
know.
it's
Yeah.
just an evolution.
Well,
It
it is
just keeps on
absolutely,
expanding and
absolutely.
expanding.
Well,
But
and the funny thing is
but
that you
the
got
speed at which
business
the
people,
the speed at which it's happening.
the people that are being persecuted, the Russians, they're in Europe, right? So they're
Yeah.
essentially pro-European. They are
Yeah.
actually the people who are not entirely supportive of Putin, and they're the ones being persecuted. So they are basically, out selecting the people who ought to be their allies. I'm talking from the point of view of the Europeans and the Americans, right?
Mm.
And who are they scaring off? They're scaring off the people who are sort of like on the fence about Putin and Europe, and these people who are now in Russia and want to stay in Russia desperately and don't want their assets seized, so they're never going to send any money to Europe. Those people are going to be more aligned with Putin than ever. I mean, it's just playing into Putin and the Kremlin's hands. It's strengthening them,
Yeah.
and it's weakening the people who could potentially in Russia oppose Putin, which is supposedly their grand scheme. These people are just the gang that can't shoot straight, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Yeah, well, indeed, absolutely. But I mean, Alex is absolutely right. This hasn't come from nowhere. We've seen a steady pattern of this, but I mean, it's now escalating to an incredible level, and a level that I would never have imagined. And of course, there's no pushback against it. There's no serious pushback against it. And one is terrified as to where this is going to go. I mean, and at what point, if any, this is going to stop. It is a snake devouring its own tail, because the entire financial system, any financial system, anywhere, ultimately depends on trust. If that goes,
that's it. That's
it. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, maybe you can say, Russian oligarchs aren't the most likable of people. It's true. They're not very popular. But, if you start with them and you get away with it, you'll go on to someone else sooner or later. You're bound to.
Turning a little bit back to the war itself, did you gentlemen hear about the Tochka U missile that was intercepted over Kherson?
Absolutely. I heard about it. This morning, and very, very disturbing development as well. And I'm sure that this is another indication, firstly, that the war is going badly for Ukraine, but it's also, I am sure, a violent reaction to the fact that there's now these rumors that a referendum is being prepared in Kherson region. And I think this is causing growing alarm in Kiev, and it's provoked this extreme response. But I think the other point about it is the Ukrainians, who must know that the situation in Donbass is absolutely going hideously wrong. They're probably hoping that if they can launch some kind of incident in Kherson, that will divert the Russians to lose their focus on what's going on Donbass. It partly worked before. I don't know if you all remember, but back in early March, there was a Ukrainian missile strike on Donetsk.
Yes, I know.
Absolutely. I know. And it seems that some of the militia units that were involved in clearing Mariupol, they insisted on being redeployed to attack the Ukrainian positions opposite Donetsk in order to try and push them away from Donetsk. And this is difficult to do because these are very heavily fortified positions, but it was impossible to prevent these people going because it was their own families who were threatened in this way. And that slowed down the clearing of Mariupol, it seems. So it bought the Ukrainians some weeks. It's not going to work in Kherson for the fundamentally different reason that the people they're up against in Kherson are, of course, the Russian military. All it will do is it will solidify anti-Ukrainian feeling in Kherson.
Actually, I hadn't thought of that. That's a very good insight, Alexander. The notion that the local militia would want to go back to Donetsk to ensure that a second attack like that would not happen. Whereas here in Kherson, because it's the Russian military, not a local militia, there is not going to be that issue, which is And you're absolutely right. It's just going to drive the people of Kherson more into the arms of the Russians, because we're hearing all kinds of stories. That there are so many stories that you cannot say, "Oh, it's anecdotal evidence." No, when you have enough anecdotal evidence, it's evidence. You know, it's a trend. It's data, and it's very, very ugly. What the stories that are being told about retreating forces, about forces doing all kinds of horrific acts, and I let me ask you the following question to both of you guys. It seems as if we are coming to an end game here. Especially insofar as Eastern Ukraine, none of the three of us is a military expert, but from what we're all able to suss out from the recent reports, it seems clear that the Russians are relentlessly, methodically grinding on and capturing and establishing a stronger cauldron, and it's sort of like inevitable. And every serious military analyst that we've heard is saying, it's inevitable that this cauldron in East Ukraine will be sealed shut, and that will be that, and that will be the end of it. What do you think will happen once that happens? What do you think will happen once the great battle of the Donbass is done once and for all, and ends as we all expect it to end?
My own personal guess is that the Russians will continue to speak to the Ukrainians, saying, look, for heaven's sake, come to terms. But I don't think that will reduce the tempo of military operations. We had those comments from that Russian General Minekayev, the other day, who was the general who is involved in, he's the deputy commander of the Central Military District in Russia, which is the one that covers much of the Russian military industrial complex in places like the Urals. And basically, he was making it fairly clear that, we're going to build on this corridor first to Crimea, the land corridor, and then eventually I think they will move forward, take Nikolaev. That'll be the next place I think they will go, and then eventually Odessa. That seems to me the most likely course. But, I'm not party to their plans. It could be other places. It could be a certain city that you know very well in northern Ukraine. I'm going to be careful what I say, Gonzalo, because I'm concerned about saying too much given where you are. But, it could be that will be the next focus. But I think if Ukraine continues to refuse to negotiate, then I don't think the tempo of military operations will slow. I think it will accelerate because there will be fewer trained Ukrainian soldiers able to fight. And that's the point. That's the whole point of this operation in Donbass. You crush the army. And this major purpose at the moment is not to liberate Donbass. I mean, that's obviously they will achieve that. But the main purpose is to destroy the Ukrainian army in Donbass. And then you're able to start moving your pieces more rapidly across the board, start moving them towards Nikolaev, where the Ukrainians are suffering heavy losses. There was a report a few weeks ago, not about a week ago, actually, about the fact that the humanitarian situation in Nikolaev is extremely bad, that there's lack of fresh water, interrupted power supplies, those kind of things. There's apparently an oil crisis now in Odessa, presumably because of what's happened with the railway situations and all that sort of thing. So, but I mean, if it's not there, it may be somewhere else. But as I said, I think that you will see an acceleration of the military tempo. So that's what I think will happen, unless Ukraine decides finally to come to terms.
Yeah, Blinken and Lloyd Austin went to Kiev, allegedly. Sorry, I'm very cynical about where these people meet up, but Blinken and Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, went to meet with Zelensky, and they said words to the effect that basically negotiate. That seems to be the memo that came out of that particular meeting. My read of it, to tell you the truth, was that it was a kiss-off. That the State Department and the Department of Defense were telling the Zelensky regime, it's over. So you better start negotiating. The headline in the West was, "Oh, Putin will never negotiate." But when you actually read what Blinken was saying, he was basically saying, yes, we should negotiate, and Ukraine as a neutral state. I mean, it seemed like they were giving up the ghost finally.
Yeah.
Do you read it that way, or how do you read it?
Up to a point. I mean, I feel very, very bitter and angry about this because, of course, Blinken and Austin are now talking about Ukraine being a neutral state. If they'd said this in December or January or early February, it's highly likely, in fact, it's to my mind, entirely certain that we would have avoided this war. I mean, it was that refusal to accept the reality that Ukraine has no option but to remain a neutral state that has resulted in this war. But, on the one hand, I think that they now recognize that's going to happen, that Ukraine, they're not going to be able to get Ukraine into NATO. That particular game is lost and lost conclusively. But at the same time, I don't think that they're able to accept conceptually the further implications of the military situation in Ukraine, that the fact that Ukraine will have to give up Crimea, give up Donbass, very probably Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, perhaps Nikolaev, perhaps other regions too. I don't think they're prepared to do that. And I think that when they say negotiate, at the same time, of course, they say, we're going to give you 90 howitzers. We're going to get our friends in Germany to send you Gepard anti-aircraft tanks. We're going to do all of these things. We're going to help you to achieve victory. And the danger is that the Ukrainians, whatever they hear in private, will go with what they're told in public. They'll say to themselves, if the Americans aren't able to speak a single message, we will simply go along with the hardline part of it rather than the more moderate one. And unless and until Western leaders finally internalize and accept that the situation is irretrievable and that the only option is to surrender, rather not surrender, but to negotiate seriously, then I'm afraid that signals like this are just not going to achieve anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's something else that's going on. You've all heard of these attacks that the Russians have carried out on the railways, the railway converters, the electrical stations.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know that I'm. It's not quite that. It's some other name for it. But it's basically
traction substations.
Traction substations. Thank you so much. Yeah, but it's only in the West. It leads me to conclude that the Russians are already thinking ahead. Well, I mean, they've been thinking. They always think ahead. But I think that they are already making up their minds that they are going to just make of Western Ukraine, Central and Western Ukraine, just an unlivable little rump state.
They're also creating a border, Gonzalo. A de facto border as well. They're cutting off the bridges and the railways, so they're already separating rump Ukraine from the rest in a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, my thinking at this time, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, is that the Russians have already decided that they are going to partition Ukraine, and they are going to take the cream of it, and they're going to leave Central and Western Ukraine and leave it to be Europe's problem. That seems to be the state of affairs at this time, and the intention of the Russians at this time. Do you think that that's a correct assessment of Russian intentions, or do you think that there might be something else in play?
No, I mean, I don't know what, of course, the Russians are planning altogether, but I think on balance, you're probably right. I mean, it seems consistent with my own understanding of the situation, and I think this is right. I think they're keeping as much of the railway system in eastern Ukraine working, because from their point of view, they want to use it. I mean, they want to use it to move their own supplies up and down. But in western Ukraine, obviously, they're acting to try and clog it up. That's how it looks to me.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. Yeah. You guys want to take questions?
Yeah. Well, what do you?
Let's do some questions. Yeah, we have time for some questions. Yes. Absolutely. Let's
because it's Alex. I'm thinking about that date you have in a little under an hour. That date, that sexy mechanic.
It's going to be a date that's going to cost me money.
But not in a good way.
No. Car issues are never good. But all right, let's see.
Poor Alex has to go and fix his car, and it's going to cost him a pretty penny. And he was holding his head before the show started, thinking, "Oh my God, my car! It's going to cost me so much." And so he's dreading the fact that he has to go. Yeah, so that's why.
See, everyone thinks all I do is walk around and walk around. I do drive as well. I do drive around as well.
You know,
okay,
I mean, just
let's get
as a little parenthesis. I'm loving those walk around videos that you're doing. They're a lot of fun. I think that they're great. I think that they're totally hitting your stride, man. I'm sorry for fanboying, but truly, I really look forward to them.
They're fun to make.
Fantastic.
They're fun to make. Yeah, they're fun to make. Let's get to some questions. David S., thank you for your super sticker. Raphael says England and Jobo have to be very careful. Russia located them out of a group, and they will be the first to get hit. Not a good position to be. Okay. Where did they locate them?
Well, I don't know. I mean, but I would say I hope we don't get to that point. I mean, I'm somebody who doesn't think that we should start the practice of assassinating each other at long range. I think that would be a very dangerous thing.
No. I think it's just in jest. It's just a joke. Raphael says, like I said before, within a month, Russia not asking, tells the West to lift all these sanctions or face consequences with so many days.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we're edging in that direction. Now, speaking of that, by the way, the EU official who's been saying that going for complying with this deal would be breach of sanctions. Is Eric Mamer, who is the European Commission chief spokesman. So the European Commission is desperately trying to hold the line on this. We'll see whether they succeed.
Yeah,
I actually, to go back to the questioner who says that, in 6 months, the Russians will demand a removal of sanctions. I disagree. I think that the Russians, especially Putin and they're kind of relieved because now the Europeans divorced Russia, and the Russian people who were pro-Western feel that they were rejected by Europe. And so I don't think that the Russian leadership has any incentive of going back to a status quo ante or any kind of re-engagement with Europe. I think that this break, it's going to last decades. Yeah. And Russia just simply turning its back to Europe and facing east. That's my thinking. I do not see them trying to, please, Europe, remove sanctions. No, they're not going to grovel, because why should they? And they're going to think to themselves, why bother? We can go east to India, to China, to Iran. We don't need the Europeans except for a holiday, assuming, of course, that Europe is not overrun by the millions of Middle Easterners and Africans who are going to flood Europe because they're hungry. And so, we've got that to deal with. But that, I suppose, is for a different stream.
Yeah. Just to quickly say, we're getting more economic news. So U.S. GDP shrank in the first quarter by 1.4%. So it's the U.S. economy actually grew smaller in the first quarter. It had been expected to grow by 1%. So all those stories we were getting about in the New York Times about how the U.S. economy was booming, well, they've now been shown to be wrong. And this comes on the same day that we've received a report, which, by the way, we should not push too far, that the Russian economy actually grew by 3.7% in the first quarter. So in the first quarter, Russia's economy grew, the US economy shrank. The Russian economy will shrink in the second and third quarters at least because of the sanctions effect. But for the sake of it, for the record, the US is now looking like it's in the early stages of recession.
The Ministry of Defense of Poland announced that in connection with military exercises from May 1st until the end of the month, there will be an intensive movement of columns and equipment in the north and east of the country.
Well,
interesting,
yeah. Consistent with some of the warnings we've been hearing.
Yeah. Commander Crossfire says the Russians knew their cities would be demolished, but their objective was not to save cities, but to destroy fascists, a high price to pay for Mein Kampf. That's a quote, actually, from Commander Crossfire.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that's from, but thank you for that, Commander Crossfire. Raphael says, after France lost Haiti, they had to sell Louisiana to the U.S. strategic nightmare to hold on to it. U.S. gave the Black Sea to Russia. Europe is gone. Asia is gone. Africa is gone. This is the biggest blunder.
Yeah.
Well, look, I blame the Europeans. They out of some weird hysteria and arrogance on the part of the Europeans, they walked the plank. It was, I mean, yes, the Americans were encouraging them, but come on, they're all adults. They knew what they were doing. They should have realized or anticipated the consequences that they would suffer. And now that they're grown-ups and they're fools. And Europe is. It's a disaster, but Europe is going to be a backwater, like it has historically been, because people forget that. People assume that the center of the world has always been Europe, and it hasn't. It's only in the last 400 years, 500 years. But
yeah, Ursula von der Leyen has been a complete disaster. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Pinyamamba, thank you for that super sticker, for 2 super stickers. Dimitra says, good afternoon, gentlemen from Elas. Good afternoon, Dimitra from Elas. And Johan, thank you for that super sticker. And 1 second.
Alex, I just want to point out something. Again, you mentioned Ursula von der Leyen, and I agree, she's a fool. But we should not personalize it, because she is merely the expression of a class of people in the European bureaucracy who all think the same. In the European democracy, the European media, the European NGOs, even the European oligarchs and the striving arriviste middle classes, they all think the same way. They think that they are, to use a very vulgar expression, they think that their shit doesn't smell, but it does. And then they that's the problem. The arrogance of these people. I've lived in the UK. I've lived in the Netherlands. The Netherlands always struck me. Holland is and the Netherlands is a beautiful country, beautiful cities, but there is an inherent arrogance that they think that they're so much better than everybody else because they are wealthier, and they don't seem to understand how fragile their good fortune really is. And they squandered it, and so here we are.
Yeah, well, with the EU, Gonzalo, I agree. The thing about von der Leyen and say Michel and Borrell and all these guys is they just get worse with each iteration. Like from Juncker to van der they're just getting worse and worse. I really don't believe that Merkel and Juncker and all of these guys, no matter how bad they were, I don't think they would have let it come to this.
No. I agree with you that, this is what happens. You have the decay of empire, rich, prosperous, and then the subsequent generations are just not so capable, and they're frilly, they're foolish, they throw away what took decades, centuries to build. And this is the tragedy of it. I agree. Ursula von der Leyen is, oh my God. It's a miracle that she has enough IQ points to walk and chew gum at the same time. But that's what we have. And so I don't even want
to. Are you there, Gonzalo?
Hello? Are you there? I was going to say.
What's the next question?
You broke up a little bit. Yeah,
we're here.
Okay, we hear you. We're here.
Sorry about that. My internet is very high.
We got you. Euro Gabor says the street pharmacist of Hunter and Zelensky has a new VIP client. Liz Truss talks about global NATO in order to protect Taiwan from China. The UK wants to take on the bear and the dragon simultaneously. Yes, she made some crazy comments.
Oh, absolutely, she does. Yeah. Well, I think what she's doing. I would. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
I think what she's doing is she's maneuvering to take over from Boris Johnson. I think you should see this as a political pitch. I don't want to get sidetracked, but there is a festering political crisis here in Britain, and Boris Johnson's position is looking increasingly tenuous. So I think that is what she's doing, actually. And she's making these extraordinary statements because she thinks that's going to play well with Conservative MPs, or at least some of them.
Johan, thank you for that super sticker. Tower Man, thank you for that super
It's
sticker.
Boris Johnson is the luckiest guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I would
go
just
ahead.
want to say that Boris Johnson is the luckiest guy in the world to have the enemies that he has. They're fools, all of them. Keir Starmer, Liz Truss, all of them. Because Boris Johnson is a walking disaster. He should have been, blown out quite a while ago. If he had existed in '97, for instance, I can mention half a dozen politicians who would have maneuvered him out of the way, and he'd be gone. He'd be last week's news. But again, the quality of people is so low in Great Britain that you have this blonde fool still in power, which is just shocking in and of itself.
Yes.
Nick says hello from Australia. Hello, Nick. And Sidebook VR says, I know a respectable Korean history professor who trusts Ukraine info because the U.S. are morally superior than the past or third world countries, i.e. Russia.
Yeah.
Toilet Sauce says, you talked about Russia planning an Idlib type scenario for Ukraine. I increasingly get the sense this is actually the U.S. that plans such a scenario, permanently occupying Western Ukraine like it does East Syria. Interesting.
That was my thought at the start of the war, that the Russians at that time had hoped that what would happen is that they would encircle cities, that the Ukrainian troops besieged them would eventually withdraw, and that they would all be eventually decanted into Western Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians took a different approach. I think they've decided instead to try and cling on to the extent that they can in Donbass. And I think that the result is that instead of being able to withdraw in an orderly fashion to, places like Western Ukraine, they're being destroyed where they are instead. So I think that was, an analysis I made right at the start when things looked different. And it may be that was the Russian plan then, but I doubt it's the Russian plan anymore. What the US could do is another question, and what the Poles will do is another question again. We'll see.
Yeah,
well,
I don't think
the Russians have created an
Idlib
situation in the West.
I don't think it's going to be a serious repeat because the Russians have that experience from Syria, and I do not think that they're going to allow it. And that's why Putin was talking about these lightning strikes. They're not going to let NATO partition Ukraine or occupy a piece of it. They're just not going to allow that to happen because they don't want a repeat of Syria, which they won in Syria, but it's still a quagmire. And as you, Alex, correctly point out, the Americans still have a big chunk of Syria and are still stealing oil from Syria. And so the Russians don't want that situation repeated in Ukraine.
Yeah, but they are going to allow a Ukraine to exist that has no access to the sea and no access to the east.
Yes.
I mean, is that
there are lots of countries that
is that a correct is that a correct statement?
Yes. I think that is a correct statement. I mean, that is absolutely true. Of course, there are lots of countries which have no access to the sea, or direct access to the sea. But usually, those countries are careful to make sure that the countries, that their access to the sea is through friendly territory. And of course, if Russian territory is unfriendly to themselves, well, that's going to complicate Ukraine's trade systems to an extraordinary degree.
Yeah.
From
go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gonzalo. Yeah.
No. I don't have anything to add at this time.
Okay. From Truth, from my perspective, says it amazes me the Secretary of Defense Raytheon actually said hypertension missiles didn't matter. So busy robbing taxpayers via war, the U.S. is fairly defenseless.
Yeah. Well, he's probably trying to explain why he's fallen behind, why Raytheon didn't work harder on getting these systems operating sooner. I suspect the real truth about Raytheon and all these companies that they're not really there about making weapons. They're there about making money. And they probably felt there just wasn't enough money in hypersonic missiles.
Yeah. There's something else too that the Ukrainian army was trained by NATO in all the relevant details for the famous interoperability. And the difference with the rest of the NATO armies is that the Ukrainian army had actual combat experience in the Donbass during the period 2014, 2022.
Yeah.
They were consistently rotated so that there would be, all units would have some actual combat experience. And so if you think of it, the Ukrainian armed forces were the best NATO army. They were the best. They were trained exceptionally well to a high standard, and they had actual combat experience. And things did not work out well. And I think that has had a profound impact on the American military at the Pentagon level. I think that everybody who's serious about war has been looking at this, military men, and they are realizing we have been resting on our laurels. We cannot face the Russians. The Russians are superior. And if we go toe to toe, we're toast. And I think that realization has happened. And the proof of it is very simple. NATO has not intervened. There have been, contractors, NATO personnel, perhaps NATO officers. There's still the issue of what's going on in Azovstal, but they have not entered it. I'm sure there have been, undercover people, secret agent nonsense, that sort of thing. But there hasn't been boots on the ground in 2 months. And to me, that is indicative of the fact that NATO and the United States wants no part of this. The American military wants no part of this because they know they'll lose. Because the best trained NATO forces, the Ukrainian army, the best trained and of course the most motivated because they're protecting their own land. It didn't work out for them. And I think that is the huge eye opener for the Pentagon. And so that's why I think that, I think that very quickly, insofar as propaganda is concerned, you're going to start to see a rapid turning away from the Ukraine story. I suspect that and I think it's going to be very quick. I think over the next 7 to 14 days, there is going to be a pronounced pivot away from Ukraine towards anything else. Another COVID variant, China, anything. But they're going to pivot away as hard as possible. And you're going to see this in the news. You're going to see how all of a sudden Ukraine just drops off from the headlines. That's my suspicion.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I agree with. Well, I agree with that. Can I just say, that's too great. The last point that you made is already largely true in Britain. If you go to the British media anymore, they do cover the Ukrainian story extensively, but it is rarely now the headline story as it was just say 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's dipped very considerably, and I'm sure it will continue to.
All right.
I'm sorry. On a personal note, I just have to say this. On a personal note, it just breaks my heart to see. I've seen so many videos of so many young men who died for nothing, and it just breaks my heart. I'm a middle-aged man, and I know the distance between my age, 54, and being 20. And it's a lifetime. And a boy of 20, 25 who loses his life, it's a catastrophe.
Oh, I know.
And all of these young men have lost their lives. And the worst part is that they were so valiant and brave for nothing to protect a regime of thieves and liars and drug addicts. That's the thing that breaks my heart. I'm sorry to bring this up, but I live here. I have seen these soldiers before this conflict walking around, and they're young kids, they're babies. And they have their whole lives ahead of them, and it's been cut short for nothing. That's the thing that breaks my heart. For something that could have been solved, this did not need to happen. Okay, I'm sorry for getting very emotional about the subject, but as you can imagine, living here and seeing, in the flesh these young boys, it just breaks my heart.
I completely agree. I endorse those sentiments. They're entirely mine too.
Colbury says, thank you for your hard work. There's so much injustice. I'm really amazed how you can read MSM News and still keep your sanity. I pray justice and common sense will prevail.
It's not easy sometimes. I have to say there are times when I read things I read in the MSM, and I do wonder about the kind of people who are writing them. That's all I can say. That's all I get to say about it.
Yeah. Truly despicable people.
Yeah.
Possum Power says, can't hang out. We'll watch you all later, but here's my tuition. Hate cutting class, but commitments are calling. Cheers. Thank you for that awesome super chat. Possum Power and the truth from my perspective says, I worry that the West wants to suck the Russian resources as they have numerous nations, which will be world war. Lloyd Austin said as much.
No,
Lloyd Austin
absolutely.
said as much.
That's exactly what I mean. I think that was the plan. I think I mean they're coming up with different plans at every time. I think the original plan was to break Russia with the financial sanctions that happened in February. I think that hasn't worked out. I think they then thought they would trigger a hyperinflation in Russia by pulling out all the Western companies. That hasn't happened either. Now I think the plan C, if you like, is to try to drain Russia of resources by keeping this war going as long as possible to the last Ukrainian, just as Gonzalo said. And it is tragic, but I don't think that's going to work either. In fact, I get to say something very straightforward here, which is that countries that win wars, even if it takes them a long time to win them, tend to come out stronger, sometimes much stronger. And if you want a good example of this, look at the United States. I mean, it went through that terrible agony of the Civil War. It was a terrible agony, a war that went on much longer than many people expected that it would. But the United States that emerged at the other end of it was a much more powerful country than the one that went in.
Agree.
Grim FPV says, on Google Trends, Ukraine has dropped off to practically zero the last weeks and days.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
it's true.
Not surprising.
Yeah,
Very
not
interesting.
surprising.
Claude, thank you for that awesome super chat. Thank you very much, Claude, for that fantastic super chat. Mohammed says, Easter greetings to the Duran community. Sticky Marks, thank you for that super chat. Kurt says, Russia has no other option than to occupy all of Ukraine, either by proxy or by force, to avoid constant shelling from Ukraine territory.
I think that there is some truth to this, and I don't know about what their plan is to occupy all of Ukraine, but the word proxy is perhaps a real one. I mean, I don't know what role the Russian military will have, but I don't think they're going to allow the current government to continue indefinitely in its present form.
No.
Valies, thank you for that super chat, and thank you for moderating, Valies. I also think Reckless Abandon is also joined the moderation.
Right.
Thank you for that, Valies. Debiza, welcome to the Duran community. Mohammed says, delighted for the superb analysis by the Duran and guest Gonzalo. More grease to your elbow, as we say in Nigeria. Thank you, Mohammed, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hami, thank you for that super sticker. Jam says, is it still possible for the EU and Russia to mend ties?
Well, Josep Borrell talked about it. He said that, when all this is over, we're going to have to come to some kind of security arrangement with Russia. I can't really see any prospect of that at all anytime soon. And I mean, I think that the Russians, just as Gonzalo was saying earlier in this program, over the course of this program, are so fed up with the EU that they probably, you'd have to, I don't think you could persuade them that they could do any kind of arrangement with the EU that would be anything more than just a technical arrangement to sort out certain things.
I think the number one priority will be reestablishing the intermediate range ballistic missile treaty that Trump just basically squashed for no reason.
Oh yeah.
I think that would be the priority from the point of view of the Russians. But beyond that, I don't think that they have any real interest in mending fences with Europe. They don't have any motivation.
No, I think
what's happened in these 2 months, since they don't have an outflow of funds going to Europe and European products, they're flush with cash. And they're realizing that they could use this cash to improve domestic issues, to do all kinds of stuff in Russia.
Correct.
They don't need Europe anymore. And Europe doesn't want them, so okay, they'll just take them at their word.
Absolutely. And Gonzalo, you make an important point, because I think that long before we see any change in Russia-EU relations, if we're going to see any kind of thaw, it will not be between Russia and the EU. It will be between Russia and the US. I can imagine a situation, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I can imagine a situation where a new US administration which wants to get on top of the economic problems, is worried about China and the Pacific, will say to themselves, look, this whole Nuland, Sullivan, Blinken venture in Ukraine has turned out badly. So let's try and patch up something with the Russians and agree things like a new INF treaty or something of that nature. That I can believe much more easily than that we're going to see any real reconciliation between Russia and the EU anytime soon.
Agreed.
The truth from my perspective says, I wish U.S. citizens weren't so indoctrinated and would actually critically think and ask, why is the North Korea treatment being given to Russians, but the U.S. WMDs, crickets? This is greater and goes deeper than we know, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's not. I think you're making a very good point, and I'm sure that it goes very deep. And of course, there are all kinds of pathologies and obsessions that all kinds of people within the US political class and deep state have. And of course, they've led the US down this particular angle. And I think the North Korean analogy isn't a bad one, because you look at the problems the US is having with North Korea. Now look at the size of North Korea and look at the size of Russia. Do you really want to reproduce all those same problems you have with North Korea, with a country the size, complexity, sophistication, and wealth and depth of resources that Russia has?
Jennifer, welcome to the Duran community. Hunger the Dye Merchant says, if Elon had bought YouTube, the Duran would have reached 250,000 subs by 2019 and 500,000 before the war broke out. Thank you, Hunger.
He might Alexander, congratulations.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're over 100,000. So Alex,
yeah,
the gauntlet has been thrown. You're what, like 8,000 away?
Somewhere like that.
Somewhere
but yes,
like
Alexander hit 100,000 plus.
Plus,
on his channel.
Congratulations. You're going to get your own little tchotchke.
Let's see. Mark in Texas says, good morning, y'all. Special thanks for all you do. Thank you, Mark, for that. Franco Rally, thank you for your super chat. Reza says, hello, Alex and Alexander, enjoying the analysis. Thank you. D. Autofilos y Locos says, viva Gonzalo. Thank you for that. So, Summer of 1970 says, thanks, Duran. Jennifer, thank you for that super sticker. Summer of 1970, thank you for that super chat. Shika Munem says, is Russia really going the gold standard? FYI, in Islam, it is said that the only real money is dinar, gold, and dirham, silver.
Yeah. I have an opinion on that. Go ahead, Alexander.
No. You go ahead. I always like to listen to what you say on these things.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you to say. No, my thinking is that, what is gold? It is a commodity. It is a physical commodity, and paper money was backed by gold. Paper money originated as receipts because gold was deposited in banks, and the banks would issue a receipt, and these receipts were traded. And they were considered as good as the gold that was represented by these pieces of paper. And over time, we got these dollar bills and pounds and yen and all the rest of it. Now, what happened was that the dollar was backed by gold starting in Bretton Woods until Nixon went off the gold standard in 71 because it was unsustainable. But in 74, the dollar became backed by oil, another commodity. And this is very important because if you look at the period 71 to 74, when the dollar was a true fiat currency, it was not backed by anything. That's when you had very high inflation, and it was inflation that was threatening to run away. But with the creation of the petrodollar by way of what's his name? His first name almost slips on my mind. Simons, the Treasury Secretary at the time, made a deal with the Saudis and OPEC to trade oil strictly in dollars and to park the excedent dollars into Treasury bonds. This essentially integrated the OPEC market into the American economy, and de facto, oil became the backer of the dollar. And this is the regime that has continued until now, because Russia is the preeminent force insofar as commodities are concerned across the board. It's not just Russia, but also the commodities it controls in Belarus and Kazakhstan and now Ukraine. And because of this control of commodities, essentially it's the ruble that's being backed by this basket of commodities.
Yeah.
And so my thinking is that the ruble is going to be the currency of the future, because all the great currencies, the strong currencies, are backed by commodities, either directly, like in the case of the dollar when there was gold in Fort Knox, or indirectly, the dollar post 74 that was backed by oil, or now where you have basically de facto backed by the currency basket of what Russia produces.
Yes.
And so that's why I think that the ruble is the future currency, and the dollar, because of its over-indebtedness and the fact that so many of the oil-producing nations are going to pivot away from the dollar. They're already saying this. And by the way, I think that the next great war that the United States gets involved in is going to be with Saudi Arabia. I think that they're going to do something in Saudi Arabia because Mohammed bin Salman is talking too much about pivoting away from the dollar to other currencies, and that threatens the value of the dollar. And so this is my thinking about this topic. I know that what I'm saying is a little bit spread out, and I'm not answering the specific question, but I want to get across the economic model, a way of thinking about currencies, and understand that there's never really been a true fiat currency that has been long-lasting. It's either been de jure or de facto backed by commodities, because commodities, not just gold or silver, but wheat, oil, uranium, all the commodities, that's real. And the commodities have always backed currencies. And I hope I'm explaining this model in a way that is comprehensible. It doesn't sound crazy, but you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Now, can I just say, just following up to what you're saying, Gonzalo, I think the question may have been triggered by some comments that the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, who is a very, very powerful figure in the Kremlin, he's one of the most powerful men in Russia, and he's Putin's main advisor on security issues, and he's also the effective head of Russia's intelligence and security apparatus. Anyway, Patrushev gave an interview in which is widely reported in many places, including in Russia itself, as saying that Russia is moving towards a gold-backed ruble. Now, if you actually go to what Patrushev said, and bear in mind, he's not an economist, by the way, but I mean, what he said was that the Russians have set up an expert team. There's actually a team of experts that have been assembled to work towards establishing a ruble which will be backed by commodities, one of which will be gold.
Yeah, exactly.
So it'll be a basket of commodities in which gold will be one. But it won't be the exclusive one. So it won't be the ruble just going on to the gold standard. And I think, as I said, there was some misunderstanding of what Patrushev said. But it's a very interesting statement because it confirms the direction that the Russians are going towards. I mean, they are now seriously looking at this option. And of course, one consequence of it, by the way, is, of course, if you have a hard currency, which is, it'd be one of the hardest currencies in the world if you really get this going. But one of the things will happen is that it will become less of an economy geared towards exports. And I'm going to make a guess that the Russians will want to operate their economy behind tariff barriers to an increasing degree. We're going to see protectionist systems starting to evolve, but it'll be there'll be very strong purchasing power within Russia, and that will then help develop the Russian industrial and manufacturing base, which is now clearly the priority.
Yeah, exactly right. Oh, by the way, I do believe, but chat, help me out. I do believe, and I could be very wrong about this, but that gold can never back any global currency or any kind of reserve currency because there's simply not enough gold in the world.
I've heard many people say this, and I believe it to be true. I mean, I think mathematically you can theoretically, but I think you can. Well, you might be able to in theory, but the practical reality is it just can't be done. I mean, the world economy is just too big nowadays.
Exactly, because if memory serves me right, I do believe that they once calculated that the entire global stock of gold, I mean, everything, every last bit of jewelry and everything, amounted to roughly between $6 and $8 trillion. which is, of course, a lot, but it is dwarfed by the size of the real economy. And so
Yes.
there's no way that gold could back the entire global economy. But a basket of currency, of commodities, most certainly.
Yes. Yes.
Kurt says that the Russian promise to pay 5,000 rubles a gram has created for the first time in modern time a floor under the gold price.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and you know, if they move towards a basket of currencies, of commodities to back the ruble, well, they, you know, it would effectively harden up the gold price, which would not be a good thing, by the way, for the West,
No.
or at least for the
No.
dollar, at least.
Raphael says, guys, pay attention to this. Lavrov told the UN secretary that the headquarters should never be in New York. The UN's going to be different real soon.
Interesting.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
I didn't know
globalization's
that.
over.
I didn't know that.
Globalization's
I didn't know that.
Globalization
Yes.
is over. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see. Mark Kurt 100. Thank you for that super sticker. Gregory Casey says, gentlemen, as an Irish citizen, I'm not in the slightest bit surprised by Canada, US, and EU theft of Russian state and citizen assets. Media atmospherics in EU are truly horrifying.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yes.
Well said.
I agree.
Bruno, thank you for that super sticker. Crashian says, God help us all. Thank you for that super chat. And Simo Butthead Friends says, I would like to hear the three of you discuss Alex's observations that the sanctions against Russia have actually created an opportunity for Russia. Thank you for your brave commentary and observations on a world gone mad.
Well, we've discussed that the Russians are going to be changing the nature of their financial system, of their currency. Now, I mean, one obvious thing that this has done, what these sanctions have done, is that they have created spaces within the Russian economy which were previously filled by European exports, by Europeans importing goods into Russia, which the Russians now look to fill from their own resources. And Putin, in that speech in the Duma, or former Imperial State Duma in the Tavrichersky Palace, made a particular specific point about the Russian aerospace industry. That Russia had once upon a time in Soviet times a highly developed, very large aerospace industry. Afterwards, when the Cold War ended, Russian airlines tended to buy Western planes, and there were good reasons why, because in those days, Western planes were certainly better than the Soviet era planes were. But now that they can't import Western aircraft, they have to start developing their own. Now, they've already got some. They got the MS-21, others, but it now gives them an opportunity to ramp up production of aerospace products, of airliners, or those sort of things. Now, do bear in mind that if you do that, you are going to strengthen a very important part of your technology and industrial base, because aerospace, of course, you don't just build aircraft, you don't just build airframes, you develop metals, you develop electronics, you develop avionics, you develop your gas turbine industries, you start all kinds of other byproducts that cascade throughout the industrial system and create more value and solidify your economy in total. Now, this is going to take time, but I strongly suspect that at the end of it, say 2, 3, 5 years, we're going to see a very, very different industrial pattern developing in Russia. Russia has some very advanced, very strong, high technology, big industries. It's got some very good processing industries. It's also got some industries that now do quite well in consumer products. But it's going to be even more patterned, if you like, more layered than it has been, and it will be more solid.
I completely agree. I think that to connect what you said previously of how winning armies, winning nations in war tend to come out stronger, not just militarily, but psychologically.
Yeah.
This psychological boost, plus what you've explained, about the fact of having to, of necessity, develop their own internal industry.
Yes.
It's going to be quite a remarkable couple of decades, to tell you the truth. What has happened over the past few months is going to have repercussions for decades. We cannot underestimate that. We are never going back to the old globalized world.
Yes.
This is irrespective of whether there is a war with China. Just what has happened in Europe and the hysteria in Europe and the turning away of Russia from Europe is going to have consequences that will reverberate for decades. Yes.
Yeah.
Balke says, but hold on, Gonzalo. You just said that there is only $7 trillion of gold. Did you see what you did there?
Oh, yeah.
Dollars is caps.
Yeah. Valuing it at, when it was $1,800 an ounce or something like that. He caught me. He caught me.
Yeah, got him. Vipu says, you can back a global economy with any commodity, regardless of how scarce, so long as it's fungible. Simply adjust the price versus the amount.
Yep, absolutely right.
Thank you for that super chat. Kurt says, too many people, probably because they are not watching the Duran, are still looking for money to buy a bridge of Alexander's. Yes, Alexander's famous phrase. Yes, thank you for that, Kurt. Jerry, thank you for that super sticker. Jay Rillo says, is it fair to say Russia used the specter of being a military power to transition to an economic superpower instead? Is Gonzalo's new telegram legit? I don't think that's a legit telegram.
No,
Gonzalo.
I don't have any telegram. The only thing I have at this time is Twitter, unfortunately, because I'm still locked out of all of my accounts because the SBU has access to my passwords and I am unable to recover them in any way. I've tried. I mean, you can't fault a guy for trying. But insofar as any kind of telegram, no, I do not have any telegram. I have no access to it. So any channel claiming to be me is not true. The only thing that's me is Gonzalo Lira 1968 at Twitter. That's the only thing that's legit.
The first part of the question, is it fair to say that Russia used the specter of being a military power to transition to an economic superpower instead?
I do think this is something they did on purpose, but it could turn out that way. I mean, I don't think the Kremlin, people in the Kremlin, sat down and said, how are we going to become an economic superpower? Well, we're going to scare everybody by provoking them into sanctioning us. But things have unexpected consequences, and I think that could very well be a actually entirely predictable consequence. But it's the way things are turning out. Let's put it like this.
Raphael says, I do not have any doubt that Russia will get all its money back with interest. Russia is not afraid of the West and knows and feels they are delusional.
Absolutely. I think in the end they will get it all back, but I don't know how long it will take, and I don't.
What, the reserve currency, the reserve funds?
The reserve
you think they're going to get them back?
Well, I think they're going to win them back in some form. I mean, it may not be that the US will eventually, just hand the money over. I mean, if the money's redistributed amongst people,
no, I think it's going to be gone. I think that corrupt politicians.
But I mean, they will. But I mean, the point I'm going to make is simply this: I think that in a couple of years' time, it won't be an issue anymore, because I think by that point we're going to have a completely different financial picture in Russia. And I think you're going to have I think the 300 billion sounds a lot today, but I think when we get there, I think, it will be different. And I think it's not inconceivable that the Russians will leverage any economic strength that they have to get Western governments to, compensate them in some way. But this is all in some future time.
Senhor says, so glad Gonzalo Lira is alive. I was almost thinking it was Victor Jara tragic moment again. Any news on Ukraine troops entrenched in the Donbass region?
Well, I'm going to focus on the second part of the question, because I don't want to. I mean, especially with Gonzalo on this program, all I will say is that what I am hearing is, in fact, this morning there were reports that the Russians are saying that the Ukrainian defenses, the frontline defenses, are now starting to crack, and that they're finding it impossible to plug the gaps, and the Ukrainians created this very fortified line, which is interesting that they did that, by the way. It suggests a rather, interesting range of plans on the part of the Ukrainians. But anyway, the Russians have been heavily shelling and firing on this line for some time, and it seems that Ukrainian forces are now starting to pull back from bits of it. They're trying to consolidate around the Slavyansk Kramatorsk area, trying to build a sort of new belt there. Because the trouble is, if you get encircled in that kind of a way, then it becomes just another Mariupol, and that isn't a good outcome, it seems to me, for Ukraine at all. So that's what I see as the general situation in Donbass at the moment.
Yeah, it's deteriorating. That's basically what I know.
Yeah.
And from what I understand of people that I respect and who seem to know what they're talking about,
Yeah.
it's past the point. Long ago, it passed the point of no return.
I agree.
And that's why my thinking is that they should negotiate. They should come to a ceasefire as quickly as possible, because the loss of life is pointless. That's the thing that breaks my heart.
Absolutely. I completely agree with this. I mean, if you have a real point of victory, or if you're facing an outcome which is completely existential, then can go on fighting. But the point is, that's not the situation Ukraine is in. Ukraine has the option to negotiate a peace, and that's what they should do, and that's what Western governments should be encouraging them to do. At the moment they're not, and it's a disaster.
Well, I mean, and to be fair, Blinken and Austin gave this message to Zelensky and his regime when they visited. The problem, though, from the point of view of the Russians, is I would see it. I mean, if I were sitting in the chair of the Russians, I'd be like, I don't want to negotiate with you, because if I reach any agreement, you'll go back on it later, like you did with Minsk. Any kind of concession you give me, you'll go back on it later, like you did when we were in Istanbul last March 29th. Less than 10 days later, you backed out of everything that you had agreed at, all of the concessions you had made. So why am I going to negotiate with you? I mean, that would be the point of view of the Russians if I were in their shoes.
I don't think that they will want an agreement with this government, to be honest. I mean, I think that as part of a negotiation process, there would have to be a very, very significant reconstruction. But, I think that's what Ukraine should do.
Drasko, thank you for that super chat. Terry Hansen says the Polish MOD just announced military action exercises for the month of May involving large amounts of people and equipment in the east and south of Poland.
East and south.
No.
Okay, so that's the invasion force.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're going to pull the trigger. It's stupid. It's suicidal. Because here's the thing that you have to understand, which I understood from the very first day of this war, that the Russians look at the Ukrainians as a brother people. They don't really want to harm them. And we saw that from the very beginning, their approach to it. And they are going at this reluctantly. They don't want to, just sweep and burn and destroy everything. They can, okay? But they don't want to. But with the Poles, they don't have any such scruples. Insofar as the Poles are concerned, they're going to annihilate them. It's going to be horrifying. And I think that the Poles are just walking into a trap of their own making. I think they're fools. And I think that Kaczynski, the deputy prime minister, he should be removed, because he's the one driving this. Because of this hatred of Russia that is, it's understandable, because, he has personal issues and the Polish history and all the rest of it, fine. But he is driving the Poles into a war with Russia, and they are going to lose in a catastrophic way. So, that's my thinking.
Yes.
Satoshi Nakamoto, thank you for that super sticker. John says, the Duran duo richly merit our financial support and full admiration. Thank you very much, John, for that. M. Strauss says, my favorite podcast. Thank you. Thank you, M. Strauss, for that super chat. Fox Drake says, you're wrong about gold and silver. Watch Mike Maloney's YouTube series, Hidden Secrets of Money. Not enough is disinformation price is key central banks hoarding gold now. Jamie Dimon hoards 1 billion ounces of silver.
Well, look, I will certainly watch this program.
All right. Orama, thank you for that super sticker. Puppy, thank you for that super sticker. G-Dog says Julian Assange is being tortured by these same swine. Will any of them ever be held accountable?
I hope so one day, but not anytime soon, I'm sorry to say.
No,
and you're quite right about Julian Assange. I'm very depressed about the whole story, actually, and very, very ashamed of the role my country, Britain, has played in it.
Yeah, it's really despicable, and unfortunately, in the real world, the wicked live to old age, and the righteous and decent often die young in terrible circumstances. And that's the reality of life. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And these horrible people will get away with this. Yeah.
Yes. There is a English expression, very old one, that the wicked flourish like an old bay tree.
Yes. Yes.
Ines Fad says, will China take advantage of potential U.S. involvement in Ukraine by moving on Taiwan if the U.S. gets more active in Ukraine? And in which front takes priority for the U.S., Taiwan or Ukraine?
I think that's entirely likely and quite possible. I can very easily see it happening. And Gonzalo's absolutely right. If anybody in the US has, two brain cells to rub together, they would realize that Taiwan is far more important. I mean, Taiwan produces things. I mean, it produces most of the world's top, chips. I mean, I don't want to sort of, make it seem as if Ukraine is completely unimportant, but Taiwan is an absolutely pivotal player in the world economy. It has a huge role in control of the Pacific. I mean, MacArthur said it was all the way back in the 50s, that it was an unsinkable aircraft carrier, which if the Chinese got hold of, it would enable them to dominate the Pacific. And of course, in any conflict between the United States and China, if China prevails or is seen to prevail, given that it is China that is the big challenger of the US, this is going to be very, very bad for the US. And now, I'm being, again, very measured in my language. But, in this very strange and very weird situation that we're in, I do wonder, actually, whether there are people in Washington in charge who actually think that way. I get the sense that Biden himself is fixated with Putin. He's got some kind of complex about Putin. And you're talking,
it's guilt. It's guilt. It's guilt.
He brings up Putin and Russia now into everything. It's very weird to see. And of course, if you're talking about Nuland and Blinken and all of those people, they're much more interested. Now, it astonishes me to say this, but they're much more interested and obsessed with Russia than they are with the Chinese. The Chinese must be looking upon this and, rubbing their hands and say, this is, the perfect outcome. Not that China doesn't have problems. And, I'm not going to start on those, but, we all know what's happened in Shanghai, for example, which is a massive own goal.
Hey, Alexander, let me ask you the following question. This Russian special military operation invasion, let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
I think that nobody can doubt that it's been a remarkable series of events these last 2 months, and how things are playing out and how realistically things will play out into the future. I'm wondering if the Chinese are recalibrating their appreciation of the Russians, and if, quite frankly, that all of a sudden they're realizing, hey, this bear is really, really dangerous. I mean, we actually better be careful with dealing with them. Do you see what I'm saying?
That is an extremely good point, and we come back directly to the point that I was making, that a country that comes out victorious from a war, even if the war lasts longer and is harder than had been expected by some people, including the country itself. Anyway, countries like that tend to come out much stronger and far more powerful. Now, it's possible that the Chinese, saying to themselves, well, the Russians are a good, useful ally, but, they're always going to be the junior partner. At the end of this, if Russia comes out looking very strong, it's absorbed large areas of Ukraine, perhaps it's dominating the rest. Perhaps it's moving forward to reuniting the Eastern Slavs. It's seeing its industrial economy take off. It's got all sorts of things going for it. Well, maybe it's not actually quite the junior partner that we thought it was. And maybe we need to rethink a little bit of the nature of our relationship. I think that the moment the Chinese are so focused on their rivalry with the US, that a stronger Russia is probably something they would prefer to see. But having said that, I can imagine going forward that it might create problems. but we're not there, and let's not, and get ahead of ourselves and look
Oh
for
yeah, yeah.
things
No, this
which might
is
never turn out.
no. I don't think that it will cause any kind of friction
Yeah.
between Russia and
Friction.
China, because essentially
Yeah.
there is no real reason for China and Russia to have friction, because their geopolitical goals, long term,
Yes.
medium, and short term,
Yes.
are very
Yes.
complementary. So it doesn't seem
Yes.
to me that there would be any reason for friction. It's just wondering if the Chinese are going to be recalibrating and thinking, wait. This is a bigger deal, and potentially realize that
Yeah.
they could essentially perhaps even outsource their military adventurism by way of the Russians. I'm just
Yeah.
spitballing here. It's just I'm
Yes.
not
Yes.
making a formal analysis or something. Just ideas. But I don't think that this will undermine the China-Russia relationship, but I think it will make the Chinese kind of like reevaluate
Yes.
and
Yes.
potentially be
Yes.
not more cautious, but realize that they're not really dealing with a junior partner.
Yes.
It's just a partner that
Yes.
is very powerful in a radically different way from the
Yes.
Chinese.
Yes. If the Chinese are wise, I mean, we this is a hypothetical. I
Sure.
mean, we don't know that this is how it's all going to turn out. But let's assume that this is what happens. That there is the war. The war ends. Russia comes out much stronger. It looks a more resilient, much more powerful economy than even the Chinese had realized. It depends very much on how carefully the Chinese manage their relationship with Russia, and how carefully the Russians, by the way, will manage their relationship with China. If the one becomes nervous and the other cocky, then you can see tensions starting to appear. But I think basically these are both two mature countries, and I think they understand that they have shared interests, and they'll work things out.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that relationship
absolutely.
develops based on these facts.
Yes, I agree. I completely
All right.
agree. I mean, it makes what makes the world interesting, actually.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Luke, all right. Luke Stukat says, Gonzalo, are you still bullish on Canada over the coming years, or would you be leaving ASAP?
Oh, Canada is one step away from a police state. Well, it is a police state. You can't go out after 8 p.m. You can't leave the country without a medical procedure, whether you like it or not. It is a police state. If I were Canadian, I'd be horrified, and I'd be trying to figure out a way to get out of that country without complying with some of the insane laws that they have. I mean, Canada's over. Okay, Canada is a police state. They're very polite about it, but it's a police state. You don't have any rights. There are no property rights. There's no freedom of assembly. There's no freedom of conscience. There's no privacy or bodily autonomy in Canada. It's not a democracy. It is not. It is wearing the skin suit of democracy, but it is an authoritarian regime that is spiraling into totalitarianism, and we're seeing it every day. And that's my opinion. It's a firm opinion. I don't think anybody can realistically dispute what I've said.
Yes.
Lewis, thank you for that super sticker. Zuxi, thank you for that super sticker. Real Not No Sense says, Russia won't allow any significant hostile Ukraine to exist. A large enclave militarized and surely brought into NATO makes no sense.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Ralph says, I believe Putin is justified in a limited defense of Russian people against Western aggression, but afraid of propaganda of lies. Once again, will underpin great senseless destruction of life. Thanks.
Yeah.
Very true. No Sense says, Russia needs the NATO countries with claims on Ukraine to invade, so the bulk of Ukraine they'll gobble up will bear resentment towards the West too.
I mean, it's a thought. I mean, it depends exactly how this plays out, and whether if there is a Polish intervention in Western Ukraine, how the Ukrainians perceive it. Do they perceive it as Poland coming to the rescue, or do they see Poland making a land grab? If it's the second, well, I think that Ukraine itself will find itself in a very difficult position indeed, and I suspect at that point you'll see major crisis in Kiev.
Bauke says, and for that reason, the Russians will absolutely have to go to the Polish border. Any rump state would be infested with NAZI goons and the problems would persist.
I think that this is a realization the Russians have gradually come to themselves. That, I mean, can I just say, Gonzalo did a brilliant recap of the whole crisis, which you can read. And he said that the Russians, I think he's absolutely right about this, were hoping at the start of the war that they could agree a deal with the Ukrainian government. They've now realized that simply isn't going to happen. And that has changed their perspective about the entire war and its objectives.
Borden says, keep up the good work. Carol says, nice to see you all back together. Bauke says, more interesting would be if Russia is going to assert itself internationally in a military sense, like it did in the 1970s, in the 70s, in Africa, maybe even a role as China's shock troops.
Well, it's possible. I will say that I know a lot of Russians, and it's Russians who'd surprise you. I mean, people who are aligned with the Communist Party, for example, who feel that the Soviet Union got wildly overextended in the 70s and was involved in far too many places, and that they don't want to see that happen again. And they're prepared to play a role in international affairs, but they don't want to start sending their troops to places like Angola and Mozambique in the way that they did in the 70s, and that was ultimately a distraction and a frittering away of resources.
And also, the last 20 odd years, the Russians have been very clever at setting themselves up as the honest broker, willing to talk to everybody, willing to bring people together, but never interfering, certainly not in a military way, unless it's absolutely necessary, as they did in Syria. And when they do that, they do it decisively and with a clear sense that they're going to back their man to the bitter end. And so I think that attitude, that prioritizing diplomacy, clearly Lavrov, it's helped them very much. They have a lot of friends, and there's no reason for them not to continue to pursue that policy of diplomatic engagement, being friends with everyone, trying to bring people together, being the honest broker, never trying to say one thing and then do the exact opposite like the Americans do all the time. The Russians are trusted in a way that the Americans are not. The Americans are feared but not trusted. And I think it's crucial. And I think I think it was Lavrov who deliberately has been setting out this path for Russia. And I think it's a very wise one and will serve Russia very well as long as they stick to it after into the future.
All right, we still got a lot of questions, but let me just run through a few more because I have to run. But let's do a couple of more, and we'll have to wrap it up. And we'll answer all the questions in a dedicated video to everyone that's watching. We'll go through all the questions on Locals, on Rumble, on Odyssey, on YouTube, and we'll answer them in a dedicated video. But let me just grab a couple more. Gonzalo, this is from Fox Drake. Gonzalo, glad you're okay. Good Canada advice. Get out. Same for Ukraine. If I were you, I'd get out of there. Put on a dress or something and run for the border. Put on a dress.
Well, of course, I think that will work very well. I will identify as a woman and I will go to the border and say, hey, I'm a girl now, so you have to let me through.
Kurt says, to Gonzalo, I heard for the first time 8 years ago that Russia will be the strong arm of China.
Yeah.
They're
complementary.
Ralph says, must Zelensky now buy his shoes and nose candy with rubles? Very well said, Ralph. Otno Sen says, Romania's role looks simpler than Poland's. They have to secure Moldova, Transnistria for NATO. The delimitations of spheres happens as we speak. Interesting point. Very good point. Beer and Files, thank you for that super sticker. AAE says, how is Russia able to have various ethnicities, all three major Abrahamic within their borders, and yet keep relative peace? United States could learn.
It can learn. It can learn because on the one hand, there's a fair measure of tact, but it's combined with firmness. I mean, you don't get. Go on, Alex. You lived there.
No, I mean, when I was living in Russia, someone explained it to me. Real simple. They consider themselves Russian above all.
Russian. Yeah.
They value the fact that they're Russian.
Russian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what someone told me in Russia.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Let's see here. A couple of more. Omega says, I've been sharing your videos with coworkers to help influence the court of public opinion here in America. Thanks for everything you do. Thank you for that, Omega Blade. Radovich says, Napoleon said, never disturb your enemy when he is making a mistake. Is there anything to add? Question mark.
Napoleon was a very wise man. That's all I can add. I mean,
that's all to be said.
Yeah. AAE says from
he
the
made his fair
continental
mistakes. He made his fair mistakes too. I mean, one of which was to invade Russia.
From the continental Europe perspective, is NATO more of a check against Germany, maybe France, as opposed to Russia?
Alex put it brilliantly in a video that we did recently. We were talking about all the policies that have been happening in Germany and German deindustrialization and all that. And, you could very well argue that, a lot of the things that are happening, all these sanctions, the country that's really being pulled down is Germany, not Russia.
Yeah. It's
too
incredible. I can't get over it. I'm sorry. I know I've said it many times before. I just cannot get over how stupid these Europeans actually are.
Yeah.
Arrogant.
Yeah.
Et tu Brutus says, if the value of a currency is determined by the commodity that backs it, then what does it say about all our tech companies that consider us the customer as the commodity?
Well, I think you answered your own question.
Well, can I just go to the immediate headline, the big headline in the Financial Times, which exactly says something Alex told me a year and a half ago. I've never forgotten it. Headline reads, Twitter admits overstating audience figures for 3 years.
That's fraud.
Social media platform targeted by Tesla reveals double-digit rise in users and revenue, and then it goes on. It admits overstating its audience figures by nearly 2 million users for almost 3 years.
Isn't that fraud?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
They didn't expect anything to happen.
As a lawyer,
yeah,
you consider that a securities violation.
I would have thought so, but I remember Alex telling me that very thing, quite a while back. That he was always saying that there's less to Twitter than it seems, and he made that specific point that he was very skeptical about some of its audience figures.
The reason they're putting that out there in the press, Alexander, I think, is because they're going to try to make Twitter. They're going to try to bring a lot of lawsuits against Twitter now that Musk has it. They're going to put a different kind of poison pill onto Twitter now that Musk has it.
And we should talk about later that the Department of Homeland Security has just created this new division, which is basically a Ministry of Truth, as I understand it. I forget the name that they gave it, but it's 1984 is now a how-to manual, not a satire.
Yeah, it's true. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Amans 021 says, please comment about the covert reverse opium war the Chinese have allegedly been waging against the U.S. via the Mexican cartels, crisis at the U.S. southern border, and the fentanyl epidemic in the U.S. Thanks. That's a huge topic.
I don't know anything about this. It sounds a very, very interesting topic. Last time I wrote anything about all of that and Colombia and cocaine and all those things was many, many years ago. And I haven't looked at this topic at all, and I'd be very interested to see it. I mean, I didn't know that there was a Chinese connection, but nothing would surprise me.
The U.S. border is a mess, but
it's a mess.
Don't worry, the border is on the case.
Is on the case, absolutely.
She'll fix it up. Raphael says Germany will end the war and make peace. Thank you very much, and let's do a couple of more. Lloyd says, what is the real reason the West wants regime change in Russia? It's another big topic.
That's a huge topic. I mean, I think that's a whole program, actually. I mean, briefly, access to resources and Russian resources and to isolate China.
And also there are other things ancient, ancestral, ethno-religious hatred that knows no bounds.
I agree with that too, yeah.
Johan says, $5 more towards Alexander's wallpaper. Thank you very much, Johan, for that. And we'll do one final one, and then I have to get out of here. Everett says, to paraphrase the late psychotherapist M. Scott Peck, quote, "Evil is above all stupid."
I agree, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I in my previous work, I had to meet many people who you could classify them as evil. I used to have to go and meet them in the cells in the Royal Courts of Justice. And I think that's fundamentally correct. Most of them were basically either stupid or at some level mad.
Van 1976, thank you for that super sticker. Amanzo21 says, check Ed Calderon on China and the cartels. Ed Calderon.
Okay.
We will do that. Devin says, this Germanophobia will sooner or later make Germany fall to Russia and China's arms, with India soon joining because of U.S. aggression, a power quartet.
Very, very long time before that happens. I mean, don't underestimate German pride and, contempt for Russians and all those kind of things. I mean, I've encountered them too.
Francisco, thank you for that. Awesome super chat. Thank you very much, Francisco, for that. And Grim FPV, this will be the last one. Russia wanted to incur sanctions to insulate their economy from the collapsing West.
Again, I don't know that they actually planned it, but I always say this: it doesn't sometimes matter what people intend; it's what the result is, and that could very well turn out to be the result.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Macadamia, thank you for that super chat. Asmi says, Christ has risen. I hope you guys had a good and restful holidays. As it looks, things are picking up the pace very quickly. I thank you for helping me stay sane. Hello from Canada. Thank you very much for that. And let's see. Balka says, and for that reason, the Russians will absolutely have to go to the Polish border. I think we read that one. There's a lot of chats. Gordana, thank you for that super sticker. We'll get to these on a dedicated show, guys. Eric says, United States media is switching to McCarthy and January 6th.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
So they are switching.
Yeah.
Darren says, to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. That's from Aristotle.
Yeah. Wow.
And Gregory says, America's grand assumption is that its propaganda about the power of U.S. military is such that no one would ever dare to challenge them. Their bluff is called and they have nothing.
Wow.
Excellent quotes.
Excellent.
Threlino says, can Elon achieve something in collective West with free speech and Twitter?
Elon Musk wants to make money. And my thinking is that the first order of business he's going to do is create this monthly subscription fee where you get a blue check mark for $3 per month. That's what he's going to do. And he's also going to try to de-anonymize Twitter so that companies can sell more products to Twitter users. And so what will happen is that he will create this system whereby you pay $2 or $3 per month and you get a blue check mark that is quote unquote verified. And that'll be, if a couple of million, say 3 million users, which is a reasonable number, go for this $3 per month scheme, that'll represent what, about 10 million a month, 120 million a year, and just right to the bottom line, just for a little blue badge. And what'll happen also, but in order to get that blue badge, you will have to actually show your real identification. And that way, Musk will be able to sell this data for a boatload of cash to different companies trying to sell you stuff. So he'll make money off of you because you're going to be paying $3 a month. And he'll be making money off the advertisers who are going to reach out to you and try to sell you all kinds of stuff. And so for him, it's just going to be a big old moneymaker. I mean, he's going to do very well from this deal. And as to whether or not he's a free speech champion, look, everybody thought that Donald Trump was going to make America great again. How did that work out? I mean, so don't trust some rich guy who's going to sweep in and save the day. That's ridiculous. Okay, that's like believing in Lord of the Rings fairy tales, Marvel comic book movies. That's not reality. These people don't act in the best interests of the public. They act in their own best interest to make the most amount of money off of you, off of me, off of all of us. And they don't care what damage they make. And if they can portray themselves as heroic, fine. But remember one thing. Elon Musk portrays himself as a friend to the environment. The way he makes his money is by regulatory arbitrage. That's how all renewable energy companies make their money, by creating market inefficiencies and then exploiting those market inefficiencies. They create those market inefficiencies by financing lobbyists who push certain rules and regulations, which these politicians pass, and off of these rules and regulations, which are specifically designed to have loopholes or have conditions that will make the oligarchs a great deal of money. If Tesla were a regular car company, it would have been bankrupt years ago. It makes money from selling carbon credits. That's its business. These people are not your friend. Sorry for the mini rant.
He is not Tony Stark. That's for sure. Tatiana Carmichael, thank you for that super sticker. And let's end it there, everybody.
Absolutely.
We do have a lot more questions, and as I said,
we will
get to them in a dedicated
yeah.
show. Look up the documentary Ukraine on Fire, Eyes Wide Shut. Thank you for that. All right. Any final thoughts, Gonzalo, Alexander, as we sign off?
No, I mean
sorry, Alexander, please. You.
Yeah, gas for rubles is a developing story, but it's a huge one. It's the biggest thing so far in the whole war, in my opinion.
I don't have a final note. I just want to say thank you both for having me on once again. It's always such a pleasure. And it's just so much fun. I could be here for hours, and sometimes we have been here for hours. But I just enjoy it so much. It's such a delight to talk to you guys and answer the questions from the audience. It's just, it feels like a vacation. I'm always so energized after going on your show. And so thank you so much for having me on. I so appreciate it.